the cancer of the mind, and you've explained that it isn't really a cancer as such. It was a term given to you. We all know that a cancer in the body left unchecked will be perhaps fatal. True?
Absolutely.
It grows.
Mm-hmm.
How about the concept of the cancer of the mind left unchecked? As a psychiatrist, what would you expect about that?
Well, the same thing, and that's why I thought it was a useful metaphor. You know, in our society, we sometimes have the sense if you can't do an X-ray and show it, it isn't real. Depression is real, and people suffer with it, and they describe it, and we can see in their behavior it's reflected, and we as doctors try to deal with it. Mental disability, mental impairment is real in a variety of ways, and there's been so much misunderstanding. Advocates now try to make the point just because the doctors don't have an X-ray yet doesn't mean that mental impairment doesn't really happen. That's why I felt this metaphor of cancer of the mind was so useful. The mind, metaphorically speaking, can become broken or impaired in a variety of ways. Old people, where they become demented. We may on X-rays nowadays see that there's certain atrophy of the brain, but before we had those tests, they were still becoming demented, and psychiatrists saw it by seeing changes in personality, changes in intellectual level, changes in functioning. To say that those people, when they got older, were now choosing to misbehave would be to miss the reality that mental impairment is real. That's the point I'm trying to get across by using that metaphor.
There's been a lot of discussion here relative to these experimentations of Mr. Dahmer wanting to perform lobotomies, that is, destroying the intellectual portion of the brain, so as to create a zombie-like person that he could use for his purposes as some measure of his not necessarily being a necrophiliac. Can anyone that you know of without great medical training perform the kind of experimentation that Mr. Dahmer started involving himself in to create a zombie-like person in the manner and form in which he tried to do it in his apartment using the type of instrumentalities that he used?
Well, again, the answer to your question is obvious. Of course not.
Now, assume that a person came to you and said, what I am doing in my house is using my children for experimental purposes, and I want to create them into something other than what they are intelligence-wise by destroying their frontal lobe. And what I am doing is drilling holes in their head and pouring liquid down there to destroy their intellectual functioning. What would you think about a person that would come to you and tell you that he was doing that kind of experimentation when he told you that his object is to keep them alive and create zombies? What would you think of that?
Well, again, it's obvious. I'd need to be taking a very close look at whether or not they're mentally ill. Everybody would have a very high index of suspicion that they probably are. And then I'd set about, what we talked about earlier, the business of differential diagnosis to try to get a clearer and more sophisticated sense of what it was I was dealing with.
A person who attempts to do that, under my assumption, is there any way that that person whose brain is drilled by a drill and liquid is poured into it, what's the chance of that person surviving in life?
Well, if they got immediate medical attention, depends what was poured in, but obviously that's a very life-threatening kind of a thing to do.
Have you ever, in the history of your course as a psychiatrist, run across a human being who tried to perform homemade lobotomies to create sexual objects?
No, sir.
Have you ever heard of it?
No, sir.
Tell us whether or not, based upon your interviews and all the things that you did, if you came up with any other psychiatric opinions relative to Jeffrey Dahmer's personality.
Yes, I did. The defendant's personality structure, his underlying way of looking at the world and himself, is very primitive. It's diagnosed and meets the criteria for DSM-3 for schizotypal and borderline personality disorders.
Tell us what that means.
That means that he has long-standing underlying disturbances in how he looks at himself and his relationships with other people. So problems with his self-image, the presence of bizarre ideas and preoccupations, impulsiveness, mood instability, frustration, intolerance. One of the hallmarks of borderline personality is a frantic attempt to avoid real or imagined abandonment, and that is something that was a mental process with him on every occasion.
Standing alone, is that a mental disease?
It can reach psychotic proportions. Those are two personality disorders that can reach psychotic proportions. They are the most serious in that sense.
So it can be a mental disease, staying alone, it may not be.
Right.
That takes an investigator like yourself to at least make an estimate as to whether or not you feel it's reached that proportion.
That's correct.
Tell us the other type of personality disorder that you talked about. I think you call it borderline.
The borderline personality is the disturbance in self-image and relationships with others. He has, since childhood, had a disturbance in self-image. He doesn't view himself as a very worthy individual. He can't imagine himself actually having an ongoing adult relationship with someone. So he tries to solve a problem of still needing that by some of these horrible activities.
Tell us if you found any other related physical conditions within the investigation that a psychiatrist may do in a case such as this, so bring it to our attention if there were any.
The additional, if I've not mentioned, I would have to mention now psychotic disorder not otherwise specified. I believe I did touch on that.
I think you did in reference to the temple.
Yes.
This is a drawing by Jeffrey Dahmer of his power temple, complete with skeletons and skulls.
Now, you said something about a global assessment of functioning. Is that part of the DSM-3R?
Yes, it is.
That concept? What is
Yes.
that? What do psychiatrists use that for?
Well, they diagnosed that on axis 5, which is the final, the fifth axis, and that they use that to look at the person's overall level of mental functioning. A score of 1 would be the worst possible score you could get. The number 90 would indicate a level of mental health that most of us would hope to achieve.
Okay, and where would you find Mr. Dahmer within 1 to 90?
I found him to be in the lowest range. I coded him from 1 to 10, which is a scale, would be the lowest possible score range.
What did you see that led you to conclude that? Is this done to a reasonable degree of psychiatric certainty?
Yes, it is.
Tell us what happened that caused you to do that scoring as you saw it, Mr. Dahmer.
Well, I saw in him a present danger, a persistent danger of severely hurting or killing others, and some danger of hurting himself. There was behavior that was considerably influenced by delusions, along with extreme impairment in interpersonal relationships.
Now, you mentioned that the defendant had an underlying personality structure. You used the word extremely primitive.
Yes.
Tell us what you mean by that, please.
Well, the borderline personality, for example, is considered to be can be considered to be a level of personality development. It contains some of the most serious symptoms that cause either distress or interference with our relationships with others.
You indicated that you found, because of Jeffrey Dahmer's personal power center that you've described, this temple and what he was going to gain from it,
Yes.
some psychotic disorder not otherwise specified. Why is that called not otherwise specified?
It's called not otherwise specified because it is specified if it's a definite diagnosis of schizophrenia. That's a psychotic disorder with the
So that's specified.
That's specified. Non-bizarre delusions are called delusional disorders, and they're specified. What we don't have a category for is someone that has bizarre delusions like this without hallucinations, without meeting other criteria for an organic or non-organic psychosis. And I do want to add that it is not just the power center itself that leads me to the psychotic, not otherwise specified diagnosis. There are other examples of delusional psychotic behavior.
Tell us what they are.
Those are not only the belief, but the attempt to make zombies out of individuals. That is a bizarre, grandiose delusion that he could actually do a crude brain operation that would make people forget their memory and identity, and that they had to leave him, and that he went out one after another, even though these were failing, and continued to try and do such a delusional type of activity.
Okay, anything else?
The other part would be the cannibalism. That is also a very bizarre delusion, and that actually storing and packaging parts of these poor individuals, that they were going to become part of him.
Now, what you said...
Literally and figuratively.
Literally and figuratively.
Yes.
There isn't anything absolutely unique about Mr. Dahmer's sexual desire, except that the object of it was an unconscious man.
Or was a dead man.
Which did he say he preferred, live or dead?
He said that he preferred having sex with the insides of the bodies. That was a 10 out of 10. That's what he told me.
Did he tell you whether he preferred live men?
He did not.
What did he say he preferred? The sex with the inside of the body?
Yes.
And what was the second choice?
There was a tie with a dead body sex, other types of sex with a dead body or an unconscious body.
Well, has Dr. Crowley said he was psychotic?
May I read what Dr. Crowley says?
Certainly may.
I also told him that if he felt overwhelmed and suicidal and or so disabled by his anxiety that he was unable to do any problem solving, that he should go to the Milwaukee County Mental Health Complex for some inpatient treatment. And finally, despite his history of substance abuse, I will prescribe the anti-anxiety agent lorazepam as well as doxepin for sleep and the depression. So here you have a suicidal patient describing possibly psychotic symptoms, and nothing is done except if you don't feel better in the morning, go to a mental health center for inpatient treatment.
Let me put that to you again, Doctor. Dr. Crowley does not say that he is psychotic.
No, he doesn't.
He says certain manifestations that you choose to interpret as agreeing with you, although no other doctor has agreed with your statement. Of the number that saw him, including your experts, no other doctor has agreed that he's psychotic, have they?
I'm going to object to him yelling at him. Why don't you just ask the question? Objection to the form of the question and the way it's presented with his voice.
Doctor?
Psychosis is not mentioned diagnostically in any of the reports.
Doctor, there's I know you have...
Except mine.
Tell us what happens when you get up to the apartment. Tell us what you observed, what your senses told you.
Okay, first of all, it seemed like a normal apartment. When we got inside, he turned off burglar alarms. I asked him why. First, it was a foul odor, okay?
Tell us about that. What kind of an odor?
It was just like an odor. I didn't quite know what it was. You know, he told me a sewer pipe had broke and management would take care of it. Yeah.
And did you accept that?
Yes, because I worked around at construction companies before, and when pipes bust, sewer pipes bust, they smell, you know.
Okay.
So I brought that.
So you say your first thing you did was notice the odor. He opened the door to the apartment?
Yes.
And you walked in?
Yes.
He turned off something. What did he turn off?
Alarms.
Did you ask him about that?
Yeah, and he said the part of the neighborhood he was in, he was protecting his property, things like that, cameras, VCRs, TVs, things of that nature.
Did you accept that?
Yes, I did.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you just said. You asked him about some boxes?
Yeah, that were laying in the front living room floor.
And what did he tell you about those?
That he cleaned brick with the muriatic acid.
All right, you wanted to know what your response was to his proposition. that had been made downtown.
Pardon me?
He wanted to get your response to his proposition about posing in the nude. Is that correct?
Yeah, eventually he did. Yeah,
And what did he say? Are you going to pose? Are you going to take your clothes off? Or what was said?
yeah, he said, yeah, you want to take the photo or what? You want to make the money? You know, he said it only lasts about 5 minutes or so, something like that.
And what did you tell him at that time?
So I still wasn't sure yet, you know. Then he suggested the beer.
He suggested what?
The beer. Then we had beers.
What happened then?
Okay. Then all of a sudden, you know, I guess he could kind of feel me wanting to leave, so to speak.
Did you say that to him? Did you say something?
I guess I was getting restless because I was beginning to move. Maybe he picked up on it. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Do you recall whether you said anything to him that you're going to leave or let's get going or?
No, I can't really remember, but I could kind of guess now. I can tell that he knew I was getting ready to leave because I was finna go. You know, I was finna cancel everything. Yeah.
You were going to what? I'm sorry.
Cancel everything.
Cancel everything?
Yeah, I wasn't even gonna go through with any pictures or anything like that. I had made my mind up.
Okay. And after he put that handcuff on, was there any? What did you do?
First, I was shocked. I was silent for a moment, maybe, I don't know. And then I asked him what was going on, you know.
And what did he say at that time?
Yep, that if I wouldn't do what he said, he would kill me. Yeah.
Did he then want you to pose nude in the handcuffs?
Yeah, he wanted to handcuff me completely at that point.
Right. And you were reluctant to be handcuffed completely, very understandably.
Yes.
And at that point, did you move into the bedroom?
Yeah, later, he said he had a key in there. We eventually wound up in there. So.
All right. And you thought you were going in to get the key. Is that correct, in the bedroom?
But he was guiding me. I thought maybe he would just, you know, be okay or whatever. Yeah.
And when you got into the bedroom, at some point this knife was produced. Is that correct? A knife was produced?
Pardon me?
A knife was produced by Dahmer somewhere in this process. Is that correct?
Yeah, while we were on the couch, yes, sir.
All right. And so he had the handcuff, he was holding your cuff in one hand and a knife in the other.
Right.
And he moved you into the bedroom saying that the handcuff was in the bedroom, or the key,
the key
was in the bedroom?
Yes, sir.
All right, so you and he went into the bedroom. You sit down on the bed there?
Yeah.
And this is where you saw a barrel in the room?
Yes, sir.
All right. And was there any discussion about the barrel?
Not at that point. I didn't say anything. I was more silent, you know. I asked him what was going on. You know, this wasn't necessary. You know, I wasn't trying to hurt him, or he shouldn't be trying to hurt me at that point.
And then you sat down on the bed and started watching the Exorcist film?
Yeah, he told me we should watch that. This is the best movie they ever produced and stuff
Right.
like that.
And you sat down at that time on the bed with him?
Yes, sir.
And you were in great fear, no doubt.
Yes.
There was a man who had a handcuff on and had a knife at your chest or near your chest. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you started watching this film. Was he watching it and you were watching it too? Your mind obviously was somewhere else, I assume.
He was watching, yeah, mostly, and I was more thinking about asking God, why am I here? You know, what can I do? Why am I here and stuff.
And you were very afraid, I assume.
Yes.
During this time, he started mumbling something that you didn't understand what it was?
Yeah, maybe, off and on at that time. Maybe not exactly.
Humming? I'm sorry, I think you said humming on direct examination.
Something like that, yeah, some chanting sound, yeah, off and on at times, you know.
Okay.
Exactly when you start the time, I couldn't tell you.
And did you watch the entire film? Is it a couple of hours to watch the film?
It was going on throughout the ordeal, yeah. I can't really tell what the movie was all about because I wasn't really fixed on it, you know.
Okay. At some point, he wanted to lay on top of you?
Yeah, he wanted me to get on the floor at first and lay all the way face down. He wanted to handcuff me at that point, but I wouldn't do it. I more laid on a side angle, and he kind of laid himself across me. You know, put his head on my chest at that point.
And at this point, then, you said a third time you wanted to go to the bathroom. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Right. And what did you do at that point then?
Okay. Then he didn't pay me any attention, so I kind of like grabbed my bag. I picked it up. I had it sitting in between my legs. Then I just raised up, you know. Then I just seized the opportunity. You know, I said, I'm going to do it now. At least I'll die trying. You know.
Right. Did he have a knife at that point?
Yeah, but he had just relaxed, let go of the handcuff and everything. Like, forgot I was there, period. You know?
Okay. And what happened then?
Okay, and then I kind of grabbed my bag. Then I said, I'm going to try it now. And I kind of hit him. And then I started running towards the door. And he was swinging at me, and trying to grab me back in there. For some reason, I picked the right lock. He only had one lock on the door at that time. Then I just got out of there.
Tell the jury what various parts you say you saw.
I saw a head part, heads, and I don't know, maybe you could call it a hand, whatever, things like that.
Right. Where did you see the hand?
Pardon me?
Where do you say you saw the hand?
He had it. He had one in the bedroom.
Right. Where in the bedroom did he have a hand?
In a file cabinet.
In the file cabinet.
Yeah.
Right. And when was it that you looked in the file cabinet?
That's when he opened it up. Yeah.
And he showed you something in the file cabinet?
Yeah, he showed me things.
What did he show you in the file cabinet?
The hand, for one thing.
And what did he say about the hand?
He didn't really say anything. It was like he wasn't really showing. It was just like he was looking, getting some feedback off it.
What did you see in the refrigerator?
A head of a person.
Pardon?
A head of a person.
How many heads did you see?
I just saw one at that point.
Well, was it skull or skulls?
I saw a skull at that time.
So you didn't see skulls?
I didn't see skulls. No.
Did you see hearts?
I guess it was shaped like one at that time.
You saw one or more?
I saw this one.
What else did you see?
After that point, I stopped looking, period.
You spoke about seeing a video named Faces of Death.
Yes.
Would you share that with the jury, the discussion you had with them on that?
He told me that sometime after having killed Mr. Hicks and before killing Stephen Tomey, there was an occasion when he discovered some videos, commercially prepared videos that are marketed under the title Faces of Death. I was familiar with these because it was a fad a few years ago for teenagers to rent these, and they are a compilation of particularly gruesome and explicit real footage of various events around the world. And Mr. Dahmer asked me if I was familiar with those and said that he hadn't told anyone else about this, but that he had watched those videos a couple of times before meeting Stephen Tomey, and had rented them from ordinary video supply places. His description was, quote, "They're pretty gruesome, very realistic. They show people in various stages of death, and they showed an autopsy on one young guy. They cut the skull, removed the brain, cut open the chest area, and removed the organs, sewed them back up. Then they showed executions of World War II and things like that, very graphic." I asked him how many times he'd watched, and he said just once, and that he'd rented them only once. I asked if he did any rewinding while he was watching, and he said, "Yeah, I watched that autopsy of that young guy a couple of times." And I asked whether he masturbated during those videos, and he said, quote, "During that scene, I think I did get off," end quote. I asked whether he thought the film Faces of Death had any effect on him, and he said no, because the thoughts were already in my head, so it didn't give me any new ideas. I asked if it had reawakened any interest, and he said, yeah, it did, that autopsy scene especially, because he was good looking. He was totally naked. I don't know why I happen to have a fascination with that.
Did you also discuss with him his encounter with Ronald Flowers on or about April 3rd of 1988?
Yes.
Would you share with the jury your reflections on that?
Mr. Dahmer told me that he met Mr. Flowers in front of the gay bars downtown and offered him money to return with him.
This is the incident where the man's car wasn't operating. He had difficulty with his car.
That's right. Well, yes, that is the same incident. He did take the man back, and as Mr. Dahmer described it to me, he drugged the man in the basement, and in the morning, the man woke up after Mr. Dahmer had had light sex with him. Mr. Dahmer then took $80 from him, walked him to the bus stop, saw him get on the bus, and said, quote, he was really out of it, drugged, and apparently woke up in some hospital, and that was it, end quote. I asked him if he thought he was going to get caught for that, and he said no, because I hadn't hurt him in any way.
And I said, well, you drugged him and took money, right? And he said, yeah, I figured they would just think that he just lost the money and that he'd been drinking. And I asked, so that was no big risk to you? And he said, no. I asked if his grandmother had seen him with the man, and he said, yes. I said, what was her response? And he said, negative. That's one of the reasons shortly after that, I moved out to the 24th Street apartment. He had also told the police that when his grandmother saw him with this individual in the basement, he decided not to kill this victim. Such a decision not to kill someone because a witness had seen you with them would be an indication of his capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law, and is consistent with what Mr. Dahmer told me about every one of the charged killings, namely that if his grandmother had walked in, he would not have committed the killing. On another occasion, Mr. Dahmer told the police that in the morning his grandmother saw Mr. Flowers there, at which time Mr. Dahmer figured that Flowers was too big and he didn't want to cause a commotion, and his grandmother had seen him, so he did not kill him, which again is an indication of the capacity to conform his conduct when it suits him to do so.
Thereafter, he secured an apartment near North 24th and West Wells Street, and there ensued on September 26, 1988, involvement with a juvenile that we have referred to as SS. Did you discuss that incident with Mr. Dahmer?
Yes.
Would you share your reflections on that with the jury?
Well, he told me that he approached SS because he liked his physique, and that he brought him back to under the pretext of taking pictures of him, and in fact did take pictures of him, that he drugged the young man, after which the young man fell asleep. I'm sorry, need to correct that. The young man didn't fall asleep. He said that he did administer the drug, and that after the young man had gone home, he apparently had fallen asleep and his parents had called the police. I don't think that's exactly what had happened, because I've read the police reports of what everyone else had to say, but it is the case that after the young man left, he was discovered to be in an unusual condition of intoxication and brought to the hospital from where the police were called. But most importantly, Mr. Dahmer told me that he had no intention of doing SS any harm. And I asked, why is that? And he said, I had to be at work that night. And I said, which meant there wasn't time to really make it worthwhile? And he said, right. Now, I think that is an indication of his capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of the law, in that this was a young man whose physique fit the desired profile for Mr. Dahmer. He had available to him the only apparatus he needed to carry out his usual plan, namely drugs and the privacy of his apartment, and yet he refrained from killing him simply because Mr. Dahmer had to go to work that night and wouldn't have had the time to enjoy the victim's body. So that informs us as to how strong the sexual urge is. It informs us as to how readily Mr. Dahmer is able to obey the law when he chooses to do so.